All right, welcome to the deep dive. So today, we're diving into something a little different.
Oh,
Yeah. We're tackling a single source, a YouTube video called Before We Were Negroes.
okay, interesting.
And get this video argues that African Americans are the real descendants of the Israelites,
Wow.
and that modern-day Jewish people, well, they aren't. And to make its case, this video uses a whole bunch of sources, like Bible verses, historical accounts, even scientific studies and pop culture stuff.
Really? That sounds wild. What's the video's approach like? How does it start?
Well, it jumps right into a heavy topic, the transatlantic slave trade.
Yeah.
But it frames it in a really unique way.
How so?
It suggests that maybe, just maybe, the slave trade had a divine purpose.
Whoa. Okay, that's a bold statement, but I see where they might be going with that. The scale of the slave trade was just massive.
Exactly. It was the biggest forced migration in history, right?
Right.
So the video asks, why would this happen to one group of people?
And that's where it turns to the Bible, using it as like a historical source.
Yeah, it's like ancient text meets modern-day history.
Totally. And speaking of history, they interviewed Dr. Theron Williams in the video.
Oh, the author of The Bible is Black History.
That's the one. And he argues that DNA evidence points to the first humans being black,
Whoa.
linking them back to Adam from the Bible.
So it's challenging the traditional images we have of biblical figures.
Exactly. Like, we always picture them as European, but that might not be accurate at all.
So basically the video is saying the Bible is more than just a religious text.
Right. It's a historical record,
Yeah.
and it's super relevant to understanding black identity.
I like that. Okay, so where does the video go from there?
Well, to illustrate this point, it dives into the story of Jacob and Esau, those twin brothers from the Bible.
Oh yeah, the birthright, the blessing, all that.
Exactly. And they use this story as an analogy for the destinies of two groups.
Interesting.
They even show modern-day photos of how the twins might look, one black, one white.
That's a pretty striking visual.
It is. And they're suggesting that one brother's descendants became the slave traders.
While the other brother's descendants became the slaves.
Exactly.
Wow, that's heavy. So what happens next in the video?
Well, they go deeper into the Bible, focusing on this whole idea of the Israelites' covenant with God.
Okay, so for those of us who need a refresher, what exactly was this covenant?
Basically, God chose the Israelites to be his chosen people, his priests, and in return, they had to follow his laws. But as you might guess, things don't go according to plan.
Uh-oh, Israel breaks the covenant, right?
You got it. They fall into sin, and the consequences are rough. Famine, war, eventually exile.
And I bet the video uses some powerful imagery here.
You bet. Empty temples, scattered sheep, the whole shebang.
That paints quite a picture. I know the video then leans heavily on Deuteronomy 28.
Oh yeah, the chapter with the blessings and the curses.
Exactly.
The video focuses on specific verses about financial ruin, captivity, being sold as slaves.
And I'm guessing they connect those curses to the experiences of Black Americans?
They do. They contrast this with the success that many Jewish people have achieved.
And I'm sure they ask the big question. Does this alignment with prophecy mean that Black people are the real Israelites?
They absolutely do. They don't shy away from those tough questions.
Okay, so how does the video start to answer that question?
Well, this is where a new group comes in the Edomites, the descendants of Esau.
Ah, yes. The brotherly drama continues, even generations later.
You got it. And the video argues that the Edomites played a big role in the Israelites losing their status as God's chosen people.
Okay, so the Edomites are kind of like the antagonists in this historical retelling.
You could say that. And the video really digs into their interactions with the Israelites.
Like how?
Well, they talk about the Edomites migrating into Israelite territory after the Babylonian exile.
Oh, right, when the Israelites were scattered.
Yeah, and then they were forced to convert to Judaism under the Maccabees.
Wow, so they were kind of absorbed into Jewish culture.
Right. And get this, even Herod the Great, the king appointed by the Romans, was an Edomite.
So the video is setting up this historical drama with the Edomites playing a key role. But I'm still curious about how it all connects back to the question of who the true Israelites are.
That's where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dives. All right, so welcome back to our deep dive into Before We Were Negroes.
Yeah, this video is really making me rethink some things.
I know, right? So remember, this video claims that African Americans are the true descendants of the Israelites.
Mm-hmm.
And to support that claim, it uses this blend of historical accounts and biblical interpretations, even some linguistic analysis. Pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, but I'm hooked. What I find really interesting is how they use the transatlantic slave
Well,
trade.
yeah, how they use it as a jumping off point.
Exactly. It's not just like, here's the history of the slave trade. They use the horror of it to ask a really deep question.
Right, like why would this happen? And why to Africans specifically?
Exactly. And that leads them to the Bible.
Yeah, like we talked about earlier, they're not just using the Bible as a religious text here.
It's more like a historical source for them.
Exactly. And remember how they use the story of Jacob and Esau?
The twins. Oh, yeah.
They use that story as an analogy for the fate of two groups of people.
Okay. And then they connect that to the historical experiences of Black Americans and Jewish people.
Right, like they're suggesting that those curses in Deuteronomy 28 are actually foreshadowing what happened during the slave trade.
That's a heavy parallel to draw. And then they bring in the synagogue of Satan concept from Revelation.
Oh, right. Questioning if modern-day Jewish people are even descended from the Israelites.
Yeah, it's pretty radical stuff. And then they bring up the Edomites again.
Ah, yes, those descendants of Esau. They paint them as like a key player in this whole retelling of history.
Like they eventually replaced the Israelites as Jews.
Exactly. The video argues that the Edomites converted to Judaism and basically took over. And to support this claim, they use quotes from different historical sources, even Jewish historians.
Whoa, they even bring up the Jewish almanac, right?
Yeah, the part where it says that calling a modern Jew an Israelite is technically incorrect. So they're using Jewish sources to make their point.
Interesting. Okay, but I'm still wondering how the term Negro fits into all of this.
Well, the video spends a good chunk of time tracing the origin of the word Negro back to the 16th century.
Okay.
And they link it to that region in West Africa that became heavily involved in the slave trade, Negro land.
Right, and I remember they claimed that before it was called Negro land, that same region was known as Judah.
Exactly. Like there was a Hebrew presence in West Africa before the slave trade.
Okay, so how do they prove that connection between Negro land and Judah?
Well, they use a bunch of historical accounts, including a journal entry from 1784 that seems to use Jew and Negro interchangeably.
Whoa, that's crazy.
Right. It's like at some point, those two terms were referring to the same group of people.
It's mind-blowing. And they highlight those examples of Hebrew customs and language in West African tribes too, right?
Yes. They even claimed that slaves in America were writing in Hebrew.
They even showed that cursive Hebrew writing in that Baptist church in America dating back to the 1700s.
It's like a hidden code.
And then, boom, they hit you with the DNA evidence.
Oh, yeah, the E1B1A haplogroup. That genetic marker found in Northeast Africa, including the area of ancient Israel.
Exactly. And African Americans have a high frequency of this haplogroup.
So they're suggesting a genetic link to the Israelites.
It's like they're pulling evidence from every direction.
History, linguistics, genetics, they're covering all their bases. And to really hammer it home, they include these testimonials from modern-day Israelis of color.
To identify as Hebrews.
Exactly. They even urge African Americans to, reclaim their heritage and go back to Israel.
That's intense. What's really striking about this video is how they use so many different sources to make their case.
Totally. It's a really well-constructed argument, even if it's controversial.
Yeah, for sure. It makes you wonder if there's more to history than we've been taught.
Definitely. It raises a lot of questions about identity and how we interpret the past.
And we're not done yet. We still have more to unpack in part 3 of our deep dive. Welcome back to our deep dive. We're uncovering some really interesting stuff in this Before We Were Negroes video.
Right. It's definitely thought-provoking. So we've talked about their historical arguments, the biblical connections, and even the DNA evidence.
Yeah, they really try to build a case from multiple angles.
They do. But there's one more piece we need to look at. Their linguistic analysis.
Oh, right. They go beyond just pointing to Hebrew names in West Africa. They actually claim that Paleo-Hebrew, like the original language of the Bible, is preserved there.
Exactly. Specifically on the Slave Coast. And they get pretty technical with it.
Oh, yeah. They break down the ancient Hebrew script, connecting it to the U language spoken in West Africa.
It's fascinating how they connect the dots between these seemingly different languages.
They even claim that the Ewe people have preserved the original pronunciation of God's name from ancient Hebrew.
Right, like a direct linguistic link spanning thousands of years.
It's mind-blowing. So we've got the linguistic connections. What else do they use to support their theory?
Well, they take us on a tour of Negro land, highlighting places and tribes with names that seem to link back to the Bible.
Oh, yeah, like Chad, Ghana, Benin, and how their names connect to biblical figures.
That's like they're piecing together a giant puzzle using these linguistic and geographical clues.
Yeah, and then they bring in historical accounts like that book, Africa, the land of the Negroes that mentions Jewish communities living along the Niger River.
Right. And those Crescent magazine bulletins and that Universal Geography book, both describing people in West Africa who identify as Jewish.
It's almost like the term Jew was used differently in the past, maybe even including people of African descent.
That's what the video seems to suggest.
And to bring it all together, they circle back to the transatlantic slave trade database and all those Hebrew names found in the records.
Exactly. It all ties back to their claim of a strong Hebrew presence in West Africa before the slave trade.
And then they add another layer of complexity. The fact that many slave ship owners were of Jewish descent.
Oh, wow. Yeah, they connect that back to the story of Jacob and Esau.
Right, that ongoing tension between those two lineages. It's like a biblical soap opera.
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah.
And remember how they talked about the Clotilda, the last American slave ship?
Vaguely. Remind me what was special about it.
Well, it transported captives from the Kingdom of Dahomey in West Africa. And the video highlights Dahomey's strong military tradition, comparing them to the ancient Israelites, who were also known as warriors.
Oh, interesting. So they're drawing parallels between the ancient Israelites and these African tribes.
Yeah. And they even throw in a pop culture reference, the Dora Milaje from Black Panther.
Oh, yeah, the fierce female warriors.
They were inspired by the real-life women warriors of Dahomey. It's a clever way to connect this historical narrative to something more modern.
I agree. So after all this, what's the video's ultimate conclusion?
Well, they end by giving a platform to modern-day Israelis of color who identify as Hebrews.
Oh, right. They share their experiences and encourage African Americans to reconnect with their heritage.
It's a powerful call to action. Wow, this whole deep dive into Before We Were Negroes has been a journey.
Yeah, it really has. We've gone from biblical interpretations to historical accounts, linguistic analysis, DNA evidence, even pop culture.
It's amazing how they tie it all together. This video definitely makes you think.
It does. It challenges a lot of assumptions about history and identity.
It shows how history is rarely simple or straightforward. There's always more to learn, more to uncover.
Exactly. And that's what the deep dive is all about. So as we wrap up, what sticks with you the most about this video?
I think what struck me most was the sheer depth of their research. They really dig deep and bring together evidence from so many different fields.
I agree. And whether you agree with their conclusions or not, it forces you to question what you think you know.
Absolutely. It's a reminder to always be open to new perspectives, to keep learning and questioning.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, that's a wrap for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of Before We Were Negroes. Keep seeking, keep questioning, and we'll see you on our next deep dive adventure.